This feast of the apostles Peter and Paul is more than just a feast. The church calls it a solemnity. And the fact that we celebrate it on a Sunday, it doesn't always fall on a Sunday. The fact that we celebrate it on a Sunday shows its importance. There are very, very few feast days that take precedence over a Sunday. And Peter and Paul have been linked together from early on in the church. St. Jerome, for instance, in his book, the Book of Illustrious Men, I think it's called, where he writes a little bit about different saints, says that Peter and Paul were even martyred on the same day, not the same year, but on the same day. They were martyred in Rome. Peter first, of course, and then Paul a few years later. In this, on the one hand, this linking of Peter and Paul together can seem a little contrived. They were very different. Peter's ministry, Peter was an unknown Jew, had no great status in the Jewish faith, while Paul was would have been a recognized figure of some prominence. We know he was a Pharisee and studied under one of the famous Pharisees, Gamaliel. It would be like, I don't know, studying under Beethoven or something. It would give you status immediately. Peter's ministry, although we have that story of him with the Gentiles and receiving a vision, his ministry was mostly to the Jews, while Paul's ministry was mostly to Gentiles. He clearly, by his own account, failed with the Jews, and so took that as a sign that he was supposed to go out to Gentiles. Peter doesn't seem to have traveled very much. Paul traveled over most of what at the time would have been the known world. And there are other differences. The church has kind of used them symbolically. Peter, the sign of the institutional church. Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and you have the keys of the kingdom of heaven, etc. While Paul would have been is kind of the symbol of the missionary church, the church that goes out to others, telling the good news, bringing people into the church. But the two of them are not opposed to each other. You might say the two of them are two legs of the church that the church needs. The church has to be institutional because that's what Jesus started. He started the church. So there must be something about this that is necessary. Of course, we might describe it in different ways, but certainly one way is that the institutional church holds the revelation of God and vets it, you might say, right? And then hands it carefully on to the next generation, that the next generation will know the truth. The problem is, if the church is only institutional, it closes in on itself, right? And so the church needs this missionary spirit as well to take it out of itself into the world, to reach more people, to bring more people in. And if I can push this a little bit, the church, John Paul II talked about the church having another aspect that is symbolized by the apostle, by the evangelist and John. You might recall that the four evangelists, the way the church interprets it, the book of Revelation, are represented by different symbols. A man, a bull, or an ox, a lion, and an eagle. And the church has always thought of the eagle as representing St. John, because his gospel is so different than the three synoptics. His gospel seems to see farther, further, you might say. And so we see the church then, these three legs of the institution and what's proper to that, the missionary side of the church, and this far-seeing side that looks out, and you might say some of the theological side is from that, that theologians look deeper and deeper, And then there's one other, to keep pushing it. Hans Urs von Balthasar, one of our great theologians, wrote about a fourth aspect of the church, represented by Mary, the Blessed Mother. Remember, Luke says twice in his gospel that Mary pondered all these things, kept them in her heart, and pondered them. And so there's that contemplative side of the church that mulls over what God has done or is doing, to understand it more deeply, right? And see what it means. And so now we have the institution, you might say, or not the institution, but we have the church standing on these four legs now. The institutional part, the missionary part, the far-seeing and seeking part, the theological, and the contemplative part. That some part of the church is sitting and thinking, you might say, about all that's going on. And now if I can just push it, this feast is not about us, but if I can push it on to us just for a minute, that we see, especially with Peter and Paul, they have different gifts, right? But the church needed both of their gifts. And they were not, the gifts are not opposed to each other, although they may at times clash. Peter and Paul had their little run-in at times, But each of us also called into the church has gifts proper to us that God himself has given us. And the gifts are different, and they might at times rub up against each other, seeking to go different ways. But our gifts, many though they are not opposed to each other. In fact, the church needs each of our gifts. Whether we're talking about the universal church or just the parish. And the more we can learn to recognize each other's gifts, to honor each other's gifts, to seek out what we can learn or how we can grow with each other's gifts, be willing to share our own gifts. That will make us a stronger parish, a stronger church, And instead of a stance of immediate criticism because something's different, that we at least take a moment and ask ourselves, okay, what is being offered here? And not everything that's offered is needed at the time, right? It takes discernment to sort through all that. But that we may come to recognize that we need each other, right? And we need each other's gifts. And the body needs our gifts, And that the generosity of our offering gifts is an important part of the life of the church, life of the parish. And so we celebrate, of course, today, Peter and Paul, and the focus really is on them, right? And you might say the what do you call it when you the foundation, right, of the church. But we can keep building on this idea and come to other fruitful meditation on it.